Isn't that more doing, and doing requires a doer, which is the obstacle? No, no, nope. So, uh, how do I put this? So one, that question was in relation to this sort of Chan and Zen approach where you're doing just sitting, right? So even in those settings, again, you have to zoom out. That's the practice being done by a person who has already done 2 decades or so of training in the perfection of wisdom literature, memorizing sutras and commentaries, debating those with their teachers and fellow monks, doing offering practices, doing prostrations, holding vows, like all of this doing stuff. And so their mind already has a very profound set of understandings and tools and predispositions that, in that condition of sort of resting in that state of awareness, will incline them to or give them access to the selflessness of their own mind. And that's particularly the case when you do these kinds of practices and your mind just sort of naturally, we could say, sort of begins to swim around and becomes aware of the fact, oh, wow, actually, there's no self there. And then you go to your teacher and you say, I was doing just sitting and I noticed there was no self there. And he goes, that's it. Now just rest in that because that is the actual nature. So you're not doing anything. You're resting in the nature of how you already are, which doesn't include the type of doer you thought was there, which is the obstacle. Yeah. Cleric, if you tune in later, I'm not sure. Cleric says, I'm going to call it a night. How often will I do these? I don't know. I think I'm just going to pop on and do them from time to time and see how it goes. Okay. So Gongsho asks, isn't nirvana simply the ending of identification with and clinging to whatever arises and passes? And isn't Buddhism at its heart a practical path for realizing that release? It's an interesting it's an interesting question. Well, a couple of questions. To speak a little more personally, rather than giving you the academic answer, here's the problem I would say with putting it that way. If you do these if you do practices, for example, that give you direct access to consciousness, you will notice that it doesn't appear in any way whatsoever to be arising and passing away from moment to moment, except for the fact that when you're not looking closely at it, it is capable, of course, of taking on new objects and seeing new things and understanding new things. But from moment to moment, if you clear away all the stuff that's on top and you just look at awareness, it's always the same. It's simply non physical, timeless, simply uh, aware or knowing or cognizant. And every moment, even if you sit there for 45 minutes or an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, doesn't matter. It's like that. And that's just how it is. And if you do practices that give you access to even subtler manifestations of awareness, it's like that with those as well. So when you start getting access to the fundamental nature of consciousness, it doesn't look like it's arising and passing away at all. And so simply abiding on that won't cure your fundamental ignorance. And your fundamental ignorance isn't the stuff around me isn't it's kind of permanent out there. That's not your fundamental ignorance. Your fundamental ignorance is that you have a self that isn't associated with the body and mind, or is in some way unchanging and resting at the center of your being, let's say. So simply abiding in the conventional nature of consciousness won't fix the problem. And this is why, for example, if you look at the Buddhist canon when they're talking about the eight jhanas, that simply attaining extremely, extremely subtle states of awareness, you know, and you dropped your awareness of your body 5 jhanas ago. Okay. When you're doing formless jhanas where there's no sense of, I mean, beyond limitless space, there's no sense of space, and you're abiding in the nature of consciousness, and you don't appear to be in any particular location, and then you're breaking down even subtler elements of your being, and then according to the tantric yogis, even the subtlest formless concentration is pretty coarse compared to the four types of consciousness that appear when you're dying, and you can trigger those by doing certain types of practices, and the Taoists basically say the same thing. So these extremely subtle states of consciousness don't look like they're changing. And so simply resting in those won't fix ignorance. So this is a really, really, really critical point. And I think, humbly, this is the point that separates Buddhism from, for example, the Hindu traditions as a general principle. Or at least the way that the Hindu traditions are envisioned by Buddhist literature. That may be the best way to say it. Okay. Because who knows, after 2,000 years of interacting with each other, what exchanges have taken place. But the way that these are envisioned, if, for example, we believe the Buddhist account that the Buddha went to the two greatest meditation teachers alive that he could find, and he learned the two subtlest forms of meditation, including one that we as Buddhists we call the peak of samsara, which Hindus would call, according to Buddhists, Hindus would call the union of Brahman and Atman, that your sense of personal self dissolves into the universal self. In that state of awareness, the Buddha said, actually, I haven't cured my ignorance. So even in the most absolutely subtle, stunning, profound, formless state of consciousness, from the point of view of the 8 jhanas, the Buddha said, no, my problems are not fixed. So, no, I don't think that's right. If simply not identifying with anything and allowing the mind to see whatever rises and ceases and passes and so forth, if that was the solution, then the Hindus would have already attained the stuff that the Buddha said it was unique to Buddhism. And there would have been no reason for the Buddha to carry on beyond his Hindu teachers and create something different. Does that make sense? And I think this is where among a number of other points, I think this is where the Buddhist tantras depart from the tantras of other systems, because, at least again, according to the way that the Buddhists envision the tantras of other systems, they stop at simply resting on the subtlest types of consciousness that can be manifested into conscious awareness through meditative techniques. They manifest extremely subtle states of awareness. They hold the mind in those states of awareness, and according to them, right? Again, this is the Buddhists talking about them, not them talking about themselves. But according to them, that's it. You manifest those things, you marinate in them for years. For example, if you look at, there's a really interesting documentary about Shiva Bala Yogi. Really fascinating documentary. If you can, I'll put the link in the chat. But if you look up a documentary about his life, there's some really interesting footage of him meditating as a young man and stuff. It's like really, really cool. But anyway, so Simply being able to rest the mind in a state of awareness where it's non-reactive and fully comfortable with whatever appears and arises and ceases and so forth in awareness, whether that's internally or externally, is not yet nirvana. And this should be a revelation, according to the Buddha, because in the highest rebirth realms and the subtlest states of meditation, your mind is already like that. It's already doing that. And if you've trained hard, you know that you can generate states like that with, like if you do some retreat for a couple of weeks, you can generate states like that for short periods of time. That's just like having a concentrated mind. It's not a particularly sophisticated or difficult thing to do. Okay. So I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think nirvana is simply being able to do that. Uh, but if you've attained nirvana, I think you do that because your mind is in a constant state of concentration. So your mind will do that, but that's not nirvana. That's just like a something that happens if you've attained nirvana. So this follow-up question: effortless resting in awareness, then effortless resting in the awareness, even prior to the knowing of experience with no mental overlay. Yes. So in the retreat I just put on, I think we were on day 4, okay, with people not by and large fully giving up their everyday activities. By day 4, most people in the group were being able to get at least a taste, at least a taste of being able to arrest in awareness without the uh, the sort of mental content going on there. And maybe their external senses didn't close completely, but they were able to rest in that awareness for some period of time and get a taste of what awareness is like without mental content and with less of the external senses appearing, like much less. So that's not a particularly difficult thing to do. You can do that in a few days if you use the right techniques, you know? I think that's something that you need to do in order to gain deeper realizations, but it's um by its and it, of course it'll make your mind way better than it is now. If you can do that reliably, it's really nice. And you'll be nicer as a person, and you can make a lot more progress on the path, but by itself that's not anywhere near the end of the path. Okay, and here's where part of the confusion comes from, because if you talk to certain schools of Zen, they'll say, "Oh, that's, if you do that, you've had like a little taste of Buddhahood. You've had a little taste of instant enlightenment." And the argument that they're making there, if you read further in the sources that say stuff like that, they'll say, "Okay, now that you've had that little taste, you need to be able to stabilize it so that you can have that taste whenever you want. And then once you've stabilized it, then you need to spend like 20 or 30 years becoming accustomed to it." So again, it's like being instantly enlightened after 30 years of practice and then spending 30 more years continuing to be instantly enlightened over and over again. So, call it whatever you want, man. I don't know. It ends up sounding a lot more like everything else once you strip away the terminology and look at what they're actually doing. Okay. Not to deride them. I'm not deriding it. It's just, again, the way we use language is funny sometimes.